Hey everybody, it's Dana and welcome back to my channel. Today I get to do a watercolor comparison and a watermarker comparison with my girl Mary Palenko. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm so happy to be doing this collaboration with Mary because I think it's really important when we are watercoloring that we're using markers that we love as well as paper that is compatible to those markers that we love. I adore watercoloring. I usually color from pans, but when I'm on the road, I like to be able to carry markers with me. And I want to make sure when I carry those markers with me that I'm also carrying the right paper. So let's go ahead and dive deep into this. And it's really simple. And I have to say it's what works for you. Keep that in mind. So I have some Canson watercolor paper here. I also have some Bristol smooth surface paper, as well as some arches. We'll get into the arches a little bit later. And then we have the Strathmore watercolor paper, which is the yellow paper pad. Now, the first three that I showed you were relatively inexpensive. The arches is a little bit pricey, so we're going to go ahead and push that one off to the side. Now, these three brands here, you can easily find at Joann's, Michael's, Hobby Lobby. They all carry them. They're relatively inexpensive. I kind of say that these are like your beginning papers because with these papers, there's not a lot of cost involved in them and they are not 100% cotton, which is going to make a difference. And I'll show you in the video later. All right, so let's go ahead and start off with this Bristol smooth surface. This is from Strathmore. You can get it in a 9x12 and 11x14 package. And I just went ahead and cut down some strips of this so we can work directly with this. And we're going to see 3 colors of markers on this paper. And we're going to use primary colors. Because with primary colors, you can make secondary colors out of them. So I wanted to just start off with some easy primary colors. So here I have the genuine markers, Zig markers, and ARTEZA markers. These you can find off of Amazon. You can also find the Zig in your local craft stores. But these two here I actually picked up off of Amazon, and I already had the Zig marker from a store here in Florida that I ended up picking up a bunch from. And I've had the Zigs longer than any other two of these markers here. Now these are brush tip markers, so they work a little bit differently on each paper that you use them with. So for this one here, I'm going to go ahead and start with these 3 kinds of markers. Now to really get in depth in the marker, go ahead over to Mary's channel and she's going to show you details about these markers and many more. I also have 2 paintbrushes here. I like to use paintbrushes instead of the water brushes that have the refillable barrel. My first one is a Princeton 6-inch round, and then I have my silver black velvet 6-inch round as well. These are my go-to when it comes to watercoloring, either with pens or with paint pans. All right, so I'm going to bring the camera down a little bit closer so you can kind of see how these work on this paper. All right, so I'm going to start with the genuine marker, and I like to swatch out my colors. Anytime I'm watercoloring, I need to test them out on different papers. So I'm going to start first by just kind of laying down a line of each color. This is usually what I do anytime I get a medium in my craft room. I like to see how it works on papers and the different kinds of papers that I have in my craft room. Sometimes certain papers don't work well with certain mediums. So keep that in mind as well. Now, again, this is my opinion of what I use and how I think these products react to paper. So I grabbed myself a little bit of water and I'm just kind of pulling that color down. Now I'm trying to make sure that I get even amount of water on each piece that I'm coloring. So also keep that in mind. It also has to do with the amount of water you use as well as the amount of medium that you use. So I'm going to come in next with that Zig. And you can see that these blend pretty well on the smooth surface. Now Bristol does have a smooth or a vellum surface. Do not use that when you're using any kind of these brush tip markers. It does not work well. And I will tell you how I know, because I had struggled for years and then I realized I had the wrong paper. So again, paper matching your markers, paper matching your mediums. I'm going to add a little bit more water to kind of pull that color upward. from the line that I drew. We're just going to kind of see how this sits. Now you can see that the colors blend, but sometimes you get that harsh line in the middle. Now, of course, I'm using the dry to wet method. Next, I'm going to come in with my 2 felt tip markers. And this is going to be a Tombow and a Karin marker. Now, the Karin markers, Karin markers, I just got a couple of weeks ago, and I've had Tombows forever. Now, I will say the Karin markers, I absolutely love, you guys. They have stepped up my coloring phenomenally. Now, if you do hear my little puppy barking in the background, it's because he's mad because he can't come in here and hang out with his mom. So excuse that. So as you can see, I did the same thing, added some water to these, ran it through, but you can definitely see how these markers work on this Bristol paper. And I wanted to start off with the red because the red is a very strong color. And I wanted you to be able to see that variation just on this one type of paper. Now I'm going to go ahead and write down the way I wrote these markers or the way I laid these markers by brand, so I don't forget when I start showing you some other secondary or primary colors. So I'm going to do my Karin, and this I'm also going to do my Tombow. So this is the order in which I'm going to do all of my coloring on this paper. And again, I think this is a phenomenal way for you to get to learn the markers as well as to learn your paper. So next I'm going to come in with some yellows. Same thing, picked comparable colors of yellow in the 3 brands. Now I will tell you this, I prefer using pan paint. You know, the ones in the tube that you can put in the pans, or the ones that are already panned out for you. I feel sometimes these brush markers on texture paper do not work very well for me. I kind of struggle with them. Now the felt markers, I actually like a little bit more when I'm doing direct to paper with color and not actually picking the paper up off of like an acrylic block or an acetate sheet. If I'm going direct to paper, I do have a tendency to move towards the felt tip. And again, it has to do with the paper that you're using. So I'm going to come right back in with a little bit of water and blend this color out. As you can see, it's very vibrant and the color works, but sometimes you're still going to end up with those streaks. Now, this is a lighter, brighter color, so you might not see it as bad as you would see it in red colors on the Bristol paper. Again, it comes down to paper. Make sure you're using the right paper. Now I do keep Bristol in my stash and I do love it. Now since I have the right Bristol paper, I actually am enjoying using these products on the Bristol paper. Again, you want the Bristol smooth surface, not the vellum surface. And it's very hard sometimes to realize you purchased the wrong one if you don't look to see what that paper is. So as you can see, these yellows blended up pretty good. But again, I'm coming right back down to those felt ones that I like a little bit better. Next, I'm going to bring in a blue because the yellow with the red is going to make an orange and the yellow with the blue is going to make a green. So keep that in mind. If you only want to buy a couple of markers, these are the colors you want to start with because you can blend them out to make more colors. Just keep that in mind. So next, I'm going to come back in with that brush tip. And again, to me, I wouldn't necessarily color this way directly with the brush tips. I really struggle with just going in using a brush tip. But again, I'm going to keep coming back to that paper aspect. If you do it with the right paper, you will have success. So I laid down those 3 brush tips and now I'm going to come in with the felt tip. But you can see how perfectly the felt tip works on this kind of paper. So I'm just going to go ahead and use the Tombow as my next one. And I'm going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to go ahead and grab myself some water and blend these out. Now I'm not using a lot of water here. I'm literally dipping the tip of my brush, taking off the water, and then bringing it to the paper. So I'm not really heavy-handed with the water here. Even though it might look like it's really just a little bit of water, I dunk my brush in, wipe off the excess on the side of my jar, and then I bring it to the paper. But you can see definitely here with this blue, you can see that streakiness going on this Bristol paper. Now again, if you're not going directly to the paper and you're doing it on an acetate sheet, which I'll show you in a different video, yes, you're going to get a totally different blend on this. But if you're going direct to paper, just keep that in mind when it comes to this Bristol paper. So as you can see, I'm getting a lot of streakiness across the top 3. And even with that Tombow, I'm really seeing some streakiness. But the color change is a little bit different when it comes to those darker colors. Again, am I using the right paper for this technique? Is this the look I'm going for? If not, I need to change out my paper. So next I'm going to come in with the Canson paper. So with the Canson paper, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to line up my panels here, and I'm going to use those same exact markers, my primary color markers, to test out this paper. Now again, I cannot stress enough about your paper and your medium. So I sped this up because it's pretty much the same thing, but I do want to share some things with you. The Bristol paper is a 100-pound paper. The Canson paper is a 140-pound paper. The Strathmore that we're going to be using a little bit later is also 40 pounds. And the Arches, which is a pricier paper, is going to be 140 pounds as well. All right, so you can see already on a Canson paper, I'm going to get some texture with this because it is watercolor paper. And this is all cold pressed paper, so it's going to be relatively have a rougher texture. Now you can totally see with the ARTEZA, it does not like to blend direct to paper on this. You're going to get a lot of streak marks with this. But with the felt tip, you're going to get a little bit of a better bleed on this. So as you can see, the ARTEZA and any of the brush tips are going to be a little bit different on this paper because it's not going to be able to get into the grooves of the paper as well as a felt tip marker does. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next color. So again, I'm coming right in with those same yellows I've been using. And again, sometimes lighter colors work better and you might not see so much of a line. But just remember, anytime you're using the brush tip, as you can see here, I'm really going to have to scribble to get that color down compared to when I'm using a felt tip marker. It's going to fill up a little bit more of the divots in the paper than the brush tip is. So again, a little bit of water, and I'm going to go ahead and start pulling these colors up. As you can see on this paper, yes, the color does work. The medium does work on this paper. Again, all depends on the look you're going for. I don't want to see a lot of blotchiness in my paper or in my coloring. So I do really like watercolor paper. And I will go direct to paper instead of the wet on wet technique. I will do that on watercolor paper, but I do it very sparingly, especially if I'm using markers. If I'm using my pan paints, then yes, I'll go directly in with the pan paint and then bring it out with the water. Again, making sure you're using the right medium with the right markers. I have a tendency to go towards a little bit more higher quality paper because I know the finish piece is going to be a little bit better for me. Now, I'm not saying you have to buy paper that's $22 a ream, but I'm just saying that the paper is going to change the way your coloring and your watercoloring is going to go. So again, blending out those same colors. But again, you can see with those brush tip markers, I'm getting that grainy granulation on there because it's not getting into the paper as well as my felt tip markers are. So keep that in mind. All right, so with this, yeah, is it successful in the yellows because you really don't see them? Absolutely. You can get a really good blend because again, the color is a little bit lighter. But as you go darker in your hues, you're going to see that variation with the paper. All right, so that was our Canson. Next, I'm going to come in and we're going to do the Strathmore. Now, this is the yellow pad. I think there's also a brown pad of Strathmore, but I happen to have the yellow pad. Now this one you can really see is going to have a little bit more texture to this. Even though it is the same 140 pounds, sometimes you'll find the difference in the texture of the paper between the brands as well. So again, you always want to test out that paper before you start go full throttle in with your markers or your other mediums. So again, I'm just bringing in a little bit of that water, pulling it out. This does allow me a little bit more wiggle room to kind of like really play with that color. And it doesn't look as bad as the Canson paper. Again, these are both relatively inexpensive papers, but as you can see, I'm getting a little bit better with the blends on this paper. Again, it's the texture of the paper that's making the difference for me because I'm using the same medium. I'm using the same brushes. It's the watercolor paper that's doing the difference for me. So this watercolor paper comparison is a really good starting point for you just to figure out what paper is going to work for you. Now, there's other people who swear by Canson paper. I mean, absolutely swear by it. They don't use anything else. And that's fantastic because that works for them. Now, if Canson works for you, go for it. If Strathmore works for you, go for it. If Arches or Legends works for you, go for it. Remember, you have to do what works well for you. I'm coming in now with that yellow, and you can see I'm getting a little bit better at the imaging or the color variation and lay down. It's looking pretty good on this paper, right? Compared to the Canson paper. Again, I do have texture on this, so my brushes are not working as well because as you can see, I'm getting, white spots in between, but my paper is a little bit better. So I'm able to blend this out a little bit better. Again, I didn't change anything but the watercolor paper. I didn't change my markers. So again, I'm going to come in, pull those marker brushes up, and you can see it's looking better on this paper. Now again, this paper is not 100% cotton either. So to me, cotton paper makes a difference as well. But look, you can get really good on this paper. We just stepped up the paper just a little bit. Again, it's still a relatively inexpensive paper. All right, we'll set that aside to dry. Now let's come in with the Arches. Now this Arches I use very sparingly because it is expensive, but I do love, love, love this paper. Now you'll see there's a lot of texture in this paper. Still 140 pound paper, but there's a lot of texture because this is 100% cotton paper and there is a difference. So as you can see, I'm having a lot of white spots here, lots and lots of white spots because it's 100% cotton paper. So keep that in mind as well. Now I do use my Arches paper really with my pan paints. I think the paper is just phenomenal with pan paints. I have used my Karin markers with this paper and I absolutely love it as well. It does have really great texture to it. The weight of this paper is phenomenal and I just think I get better results with this paper. I'll just put it that way, especially if I'm using like my Daniel Smith watercolors, if I'm using my Mission Gold watercolors. Again, those are pan paints. I love the results that I get. But you can see really with those brush tip markers that I'm getting a lot of white areas because of the texture of this paper. Keep that in mind when you're using this paper. Now I am going to go ahead and start blending all of these out for you. Now, there's several ways to use this watercolor paper. And you can see I have a very good leeway of pulling and brushing in that color. So you can really see on that first one how beautiful it is. When I come over to the ARTEZA, maybe a little bit of granulation on there. But this paper to me is phenomenal with watercoloring. Now, of course, you're not going to watercolor in big blotches like this, but look how pretty those blends are. Giving yourself the opportunity to have one good paper in your stash. Again, pick the paper that works for you. One expensive piece of paper or pack of paper rather, it will make a world of difference. But again, use that to your benefit when you're giving a card out to somebody you know who's going to keep it. That's how I judge things. If I know this person is going to keep my card, I'm going to pull out that good paper. All right, so we're coming down to the end here, and I'm just going to keep pulling out these colors. Now the blues on this, I really have to work with those brushes. I'm having a lot of streaks with those brushes. But when I come in with the felt, as you can see, I'm getting a very good blend on these. So again, I keep stressing that paper, using the right watercolor paper with your markers. So as you can see, those reds look pretty good. Maybe not the one in the middle, maybe not the zig, but the two on the ends look good. I was able to have a little bit of wiggle room with time on that. Same thing with the yellows. But again, most of us aren't going to color in blocks either. So just keep that in mind as well. This, I just want to show you the comparison of these. Now, when I get down to those brush in the blue, ooh, we're getting a little bit of scratchiness there because again, it's cotton paper. But when I come down to those brush pens, I'm getting a better variation going on here. Again, this paper is a lot more expensive. So I'm going to do wet to wet on here really quickly. I'll share this in another video later. But you can see, now these are, again, using the same markers. But look how sweet that looks because I'm using a wet on wet technique. I'm not going directly to the paper with the marker and the paper is dry. So I'm just adding a little bit of paper, coloring off some color on my mat, bringing it in the water, and then dropping the color in. You'll get a totally different look when you do that as well. But again, I just wanted to share with you today the wet and dry method, not the wet on wet. But I'll have another video soon to show those comparisons as well, because we need to know that we're using the right paper here. All right, so let me go ahead and bring all of them back in. So we're going to start off with that Bristol paper compared to that Canson paper. Again, I'm getting a little bit of streakiness on this. The paper doesn't have a lot of texture compared to my watercolor paper. My watercolor paper is going to have more texture than my Bristol Smooth, i.e. smooth paper. All right, so you'll see I'm going to have some variations in that. Let me go ahead and scoot these aside. Next, I'm going to come in with the Strathmore, which has a little bit of a different texture than the Canson paper, but you can see my blends on this is getting a little bit better. Everything's blending out. I'm not getting a harsh streakiness in this. A little bit softer, if I could say softer in this. And then next we're going to bring in that ARTEZA. The ARTEZA, again, is a more expensive paper, but we're getting very good blends on this. Very good blends. Now, when it comes towards the bottom, yes, the ones with the brushes, I don't care for. But I wanted to show you this comparison so you can figure out what works for you. Don't forget to head on over to Mary's video, and I will see you guys in another video soon. Until then, stay blessed and stay safe. See you next time. Bye-bye.